Welcome to Recalculating Small Business.
Dan Benjamin Brown, small business expert and best-selling author of, and I love this title, Master the Art of Closing the Sale, the game-changing 10-step sales process for getting more clients and referrals. He's here to talk about some of the pitfalls small business leaders need to avoid. Ben, welcome to the program.
Good afternoon. I hope everybody having an outstanding summer so far as business slows down in the summer, but it never stops.
Well, Ben, I'm going to ask one question, then turn it over to Dan. But can you give us one or two of the pitfalls you find the small business people should avoid but sometimes fall into?
Yes. One of them that I always start with when I consult with people is you either got to like or love the product or service that you actually get involved with. A lot of people will start with a business or a concept and understand that you really have to like it or love it to get through the hard parts, because depending on finance and what you're doing, if it's not a franchise and the system is not already set up for you, you're going to have to put forth a lot of effort and believe in that product. If you watch the show Shark Tank, you'll see that some of the people that are on there, they'll give financing when they start crying, because they're like, I just love this product and believe in it. So they will actually invest just because of the person, not the product, because they believe in it so much. So when I work with clients, I want to see that belief system that, you know, they like or love their product. If not, then they're willing to quit on it at any time.
Well, Ben, I'm going to jump in with another question, because you bring up a point that I noticed that I went to the fancy food show last week, and what I noticed was a marked difference in the enthusiasm between the women at the booths and the men. The women came at you, and they were really enthusiastic about the product, and the men, for the most part, were kind of laid back. It was something I hadn't really noticed, and maybe it was the effect of the industry, but I noticed that difference. Is there a difference in demonstrated enthusiasm between men and women salespeople?
Not really. I mean, take for example this weekend for the 4th, we stopped by our Starbucks on the way to the beach, and I remember the guy from last time, and I could tell by the voice in the intercom, because we went through the drive-thru to get our lattes. Don't have any discrimination against that. Lattes, they're good. And the guy's voice just jumped out at you. And right away, as soon as we drove through the drive-thru, my wife got on her phone and decided to give this Starbucks, a 5-star rating. She didn't have to do that, but it remembers. And that guy will remember more for him than it was Starbucks. So if you have that enthusiasm, your job in sales is to bring people up to that emotional level so you can communicate with them, connect with them, and see if you can help them. And if don't have the attitude, it's kind of hard to do that.
Dan, I turn it over to you.
Well, thank you. Thank you for joining us. I've been training salespeople for almost half a century, and I find that two things are constant that have never changed. One, the reluctance of salespeople to ask for the order. Mm-hmm. And second, even more difficult, is if you've convinced a customer to buy your product or service, asking for a referral. Mm-hmm. Two most difficult things to do, whatever it is you're selling. Do you find that to be true?
Well, you see it on the title of the book, right? And I've seen businesses that don't do any marketing, and most of them get a large percentage of the business just by doing referrals. That saves so much money. What people think in that mind when you said that is that they think that they haven't earned the right. But when people buy your product, you now actually earn the right away, not a week later, 2 weeks later, to ask. So when I work with people in their process, step number 10, the sale is not done when you do the sale. The sale is done when you get a testimonial or a referral, right? So you've got to get good on that sales, because you're earning the right. When I work with people, they're like, well, isn't the sales what we're going after? I'm like, no, sales are easy. You want to get the testimonial and referrals, because that's when the snowball effect starts to happen, right? And so
Yep.
20% of the business can be increased just by asking for referrals. I work with clients. The first thing I do is go through their database and say, when the last time you contact your database? When the last time you talked to these people and asked them for referrals? They're already bought from you. You don't even have to. You earned the right already. Just go back through and start asking. You'll be amazed. And they come back to me a week later and they got like 25, 30 leads right off the bat. It's your bank. You just haven't went and made a withdrawal from it.
Right. Do you find in your work over the years, is there one particular group of people or products that just naturally produce salespeople, or are salesmen? People used to say salesmen are born, they're not made. What do you think?
Well, the born ones is when I tell people that it's a process. So you get the born ones, the natural speakers like myself, the eloquent ones that have attitude, that has a good personality. But I've had it in situations where I've dealt with some people who are introverts that can outsell the extroverts because they're focused on the system. Because what happened is sales is a process, and anytime you become too arrogant and you take a couple of those steps out, you're going to lose sales. But somebody who's intricate and introverted understand that I must qualify, I must set up a presentation, I must do a good presentation each and every time. They will outsell a naturally gifted person because that person thinks they're arrogant and they'll just start skipping steps. And the next thing you know, the stats start going down. That's when the manager comes out and says, what's going on? And they'll be realizing, hey, you stop qualifying. You're wasting a lot of time with people you shouldn't. What's going on? Well, I'm a good, healthy person. Yeah, but you're not following the process. And that's what it is. Sales is a process.
Yeah, that's very true. The ability to fly by the seat of your pants without any preparation doesn't produce longer term very successful salespeople.
No, it doesn't. Either that or they get burned out, or they go from job to job to job with that enthusiasm until somebody slows them down. Because most of my time with working with salespeople, first thing I have to do normal times is dispel the myth of what a sale actually is, and then tell them to slow it down. And when you slow it down, you'll be able to see the different steps in that process rather than just winging it. Because most people think the presentation is just going to win it. If I just talk enough, they'll get it, which they'll get a sale, but they don't have a process. They can't get off the phone and tell me why they didn't get it, right?
When you talk about slowing down the process, help us understand what you mean by slowing down the process.
Well, you have quick pitchers and you have what's called pitching and wishing, as that's the telemarketers you get on the phone that just starts over-enveloping the conversation, just starts over-talking, just getting to the point and just rushing to get to the presentation. And they're playing the numbers game, which sales is a numbers game. The more people you contact, the more people you're going to sell, even if you're not talented, right? You'll get somebody. But if you slow the process down and start getting feedback from the customer and be able to listen, the customer normal times will tell you why they want to buy the product. And if you get that, you're halfway there without doing a huge presentation. So most of the time I tell people to slow it down because once you figure out why they want to buy it, what they're going to do with it, what's the benefit, your presentation gets cut in half. So you're not spending a tremendous amount of time with people. That's why when you buy a car, they sit you down and try to figure out what you want, what color you want. They're trying to figure out the why. And if you can figure out the why and how you can help them, that's better than just going out to showing them 20 cars, right? It's a waste of time.
Agreed. Over the years, as I was training people, I used to use two examples of how one of the best ways to sell. And I used to use Johnny Carson and Barbara Walters. And I said that the thing that the two of them have in common is they ask questions and then they wait for the customer or the guest to answer the question. And that leads them to the next question. If you're answering the question before the client gets a chance to answer the question, you're not listening to the client. And the client will tell you whether they like what you're saying or not like what you're saying, but if you don't listen to the client. So questions is a way to discover information and understand what the client's needs, wants, goals, and objectives are. Ask a question, then shut up and listen. And it's not important what you think. It's what the client thinks.
Right.
And
right. You want to know how I use that? It's funny you say Barbara Walters. You want to hear my analogy? You're going to love this.
Sure.
Right? I said the difference between a good and a great salesperson is the number of questions that you ask and the type of questions that you ask. So I always, funny you say that, I tell people, do you know who Barbara Walters is? They go, yeah. I said, at the end of the year, she does this great interview. The people have been interviewed all year. They're the top 5 people of the year. You've seen tons of interviews, Rolling Stone. They sold albums. Why is Barbara Walters' interview better than anybody else's? I said, first of all, she connects and relates. She does the interview at their house. She does the tour. She gets them very comfortable. They show her the cars, the mansions. Then it's all set up in the living room with the lights. And then she comes in and she hits you with the hammer, right? She hits you with the hard questions. She sits you down and says, how long you been wanting to be a woman? Bam, right? It's like, because she's got comfortable with you, she can ask the hard questions, where most people sell at arm's length. And it's a number of other reasons why she's good. But the reason you say Barbara Walters, I said, yeah, because people know, they sit down with her and say, I'm not going to cry. They're already telling her, I'm not going to cry. She's like, okay. And then 5 minutes later, they're crying on TV, and, it's nothing you can do about it.
True. Tell us the name of your book again.
Master the Art of Closing the Sale. It's by Benjamin Brown. It's on Amazon. And the subtitle is The Game-Changing 10-Step Sales Process for Getting More Clients and Referrals, because referrals is what you're going to do to make more money.
And do you have a website?
Yes, it's 360salesconsulting.com, and on that site there's a tab that says book. And if they want signed copies of the book, all they have to do is go on there and order it, and I will sign it and personally mail it to them with a guide as well.
Could you, because this is radio, could you spell out the address for the website, please, so people could write it down?
Okay. It's the number 360, so 360, like 360 degrees, sales, S-A-L-E-S, consulting.com.
Super. Thank you. Let me ask you one more question, then I'll throw it back to Don. Is there a particular, in your career, have you found a particular company or industry that needs your help more than any other?
Starting my consultancy firm about 4 years ago from B&I, I've worked with a lot of industries. People always say target market, but I get SEO guys, I get printing companies. It's really, I haven't gotten into, well, you've been doing it for half a century, but most people that reach out are people that mainly are afraid or have a misconception of what sales actually is about. And they don't understand because we haven't been taught from high school or college what sales is. It's not a sales class mostly in colleges. You get it after when you go to corporations. And most of the time you get people that have been in corporate world and start their own entrepreneurial, and they have all these marketing backgrounds and accounting, and they've been doing these systems and all this stuff. But when they start their own business, they can't sell. Mark Cuban said the first thing you need to do to start your own business is learning how to sell. So mainly I work with small businesses and entrepreneurs because I tell people, first thing you need to do is learn how to sell your product, not a website, not a business card. Can you sell it, right?
Good point. I used to have when I worked on Wall Street, I met a gentleman who was the head of Kemper Insurance, and he was the director of sales, and he had a sign on his desk that said, "The sales department is the company."
Yeah.
Sales department is right.
Yeah.
And another sign on it that said, "Nothing happens until the salesman makes a sale."
Yeah. But in most businesses that I work with, they don't have sales department, or they treat the salespeople kind of bad. We all know that, right? Being in sales, we're the first to get fired, last to get hired, all that kind of deal. If you have a Christmas party, all the management's up front. The salespeople are back at the bar because it's open bar because salespeople are outgoing, right? We're used to rejection all day. They're making all the noise in the back, IT and everybody's up front. And you can see the sales department back there. They're just drinking. They don't care. It's free drinks, right? Because we're different people.
Right.
So, when it comes to sales, I tell people, yeah, you're right. If you can't sell your own product, and people would love, you go to Craigslist and you see ads, I got this product, I want somebody to sell it for me. I'll give them 20%. I'm like, how are you going to teach them to sell it if you can't sell it yourself?
Right. Good point. Thank you. Don, back to you.
Well, you brought up a lot of different things. My favorite sale expression is the sale begins when the customer says no. And really, I really feel that salesmen have to be persistent. What do you think about that, Ben?
Well, the way I teach for people who don't understand, because we as humans hate rejection. I mean, I'm married, so, you get used to it. You have to be married to understand rejection. But normally, in my sales process, I do what's called a building block method. So a lot of the yeses that you're going to get up front give you the confidence to go and ask for the sale in the beginning. So in the beginning, say, for example, the qualification, you make sure you handle that more detail. So are you the decision maker? Yes. Is there anyone besides yourself is the decision maker? Right? So when you get toward the end and you say, what card do you want to put it on? They say, well, I got to go talk to somebody. Now I can call you on that. Whoa, wait a minute. You told me, right? So it's a check mark system that you're doing. So when you get towards the close, you're building a case, just like a lawyer, to make them guilty because you told me that you needed this product. You told me that you could use it. You told me that I can help you, right? Right. So what's holding you back? So I'm not going to go based upon my presentation. It does this, it does this. I'm going more in detail, emotional triggers, what you're going to do with it, how it's going to solve, how it's going to make you feel before I even tell you about the product, because I'm saving myself a boatload of time instead of quick pitching. I'm qualifying you to make sure you're ready for my product, not I'm ready to sell you. So it's a conversation. I tell people sales it's a different language. It's just a language where you're talking to somebody and you're trying to get the information to see if you can help them.
Well, let me go a different direction. In this age of the Internet, what do you think the role of the salesperson is?
Well, when it comes to that, okay, because it's funny when I say this, depending on your industry, I work with people who love for the websites and copy, and everybody loves this low-hanging fruit. It hasn't been this way since 2008 when everybody was struggling. At some point in time with your competition, you should have the ability to actually shut the computer down, pull out a list of names, and get on the phone and call them. I did that with one of my clients one time about a year ago, and he pulled out 50 names. I didn't tell him what I was doing. I said, pull out 50 names that you got on the list and phone numbers, and I'll come in tomorrow and I'll tell you what we're going to do with them. And I took his laptop, closed it down, gave him a cell phone. I said, we're going to call him. He looked at me like I wanted to take away his firstborn. I'm like, if you can't communicate with people on the phone, if you could do that, you could dominate from your competition because they're not doing it, right? And they realize they're getting more sales because they're doing the extra work to understand why the clients want to buy it. They're having communication with them. Why are you buying my product? Instead of them just clicking and buying, which we all do love, and that's great. But when times get hard, if you have competition or price indexes or the economy start going bad or people stop buying your product or all of this stuff that comes in, these trends, you can control those trends because anytime sales go down, you can pick up the phone, whereas your competition can't. So you actually have an advantage.
Yet in today's world, I went on a website this morning that doesn't have a telephone number.
Yeah.
You have to do everything. I mean, I agree with you. I'm old-fashioned. I like to talk to people. But it seems to me that in this world today, the salesperson has gone by the wayside, being replaced by the internet, by the landing page, and there seems to be so much being devoted to making the landing page the sell page.
Huh? Yeah.
What do you think? I want to hear your opinion.
I tell people not to be afraid of that. Real estate will always be sold by people, right? No matter if you can go in there and click and buy a house, you can still do that. But salespeople are not going to go away. Those are the people that's going to have the advantage because when I started in my sales, and I'm pretty sure you guys remember, I mean, I started back in 93, 94. I walked into an office. I made over six figures I made $150 a day, and I walked up to my desk. I didn't have a computer or a laptop. I had a binder, and I had a black phone. That was it. So, that was 20 years ago. Times have changed, but still before that, there was people doing door-to-door. So now you have these computers. That's great. I tell people that's a tool. That's not all of your business. It's just a tool. That could be part of your business, but you still need to know how to go out and actually pick up the phone and sell. And most people are afraid. So if you're afraid, then your competition is afraid, right? So, there's people out there right now that I said that don't do any marketing. They do most of their business by phone, and they don't need to because they go and get referrals and they constantly call. Network marketing is key of this, right? You can't just go on and click and buy and get into network marketing. Normal times somebody invites you to a meeting, right? It's a great sales platform. I'm selling my friends, which is selling your friends. There's no advertisement. It's all network marketing. It's a beautiful sales platform, but it's still selling the next person that you know because most of the time they already know, like, and trust, and that's what you always try to build at the beginning of a sales process. But if you go to your friends and your neighbors that already know you, then that's already done. You just have to tell them something that they're going to like, and then normal times that gets them in. So, these companies know that. That's why they're $1 billion, Amway and all these other companies, because you don't see the advertising. They sell through people, and that's the old school method, and that's referrals.
Well, there's a new thing in the industry relatively where they invite a group of people, particularly in the technology industry, to a fancy dinner, show them something new, and then have a squad of young people follow up in the following weeks with referral calls and saying, can we help you, etc. That to me doesn't seem like selling so much as rote work. What do you think about that?
Well, it depends on the sales process because when people come to me and say, I don't know if you could help me because we sell this, right? They come to me and say, well, I found you on the internet. I listened to you on the radio show. I like your attitude. I think you might be able to help us, but I don't know if you can help us because we do this or we sell this. And the first thing I tell them, I say, I don't care what you're selling. I don't care if you're selling bulk, pins or Learjet. A sales process is a sales process. Don't get complicated. When you start getting complicated is when you start losing people. Keep it simple, stupid. Because you want to be able to replicate your process as you grow your company. Your job as an entrepreneur is slowly to replace yourself in all these tedious jobs that you don't like as you make money because you can't afford anybody. That's why you don't have money as an entrepreneur. So as you get money, you say, I'm going to have an accountant. I don't want to do that. I don't have time for that. I want to get a sales team, So, you bring guys in like me that I built sales teams from scratch, up to 10, 12 people, built the entire system, did the SOP, everything else, and then manage them. And so your job as an entrepreneur is to slowly replace yourself, right? And so the only way to do that is to increase your sales, period. Nobody's going to do work for you for free. So that is the key that I tell people when it comes to that. You be focused on that.
Good thoughts. I'm going to turn it back down to Dan for the last two questions.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
And I was told if you're going to be successful, you have to make 150 outgoing calls a day. And I used to tell young brokers, do you have any idea how sore your finger gets trying to dial it 150 times a day? So, what I found once I first got started, that I used the phone not to sell per se. I used the phone to try to get an appointment for a person at their office or their home, and I found that the close ratio face-to-face with that person, like we talked about with Barbara Walters, was tremendous. It was an amazing success rate. So I spent less time in the office and more time out knocking on doors, meeting with prospects and turning them into clients. The technology of today with electronic phones still doesn't replace the opportunity to be with a customer. So how important is it in your way of thinking, how important is it to make sure that you build in a physical contact with a prospect?
Well, that's one of the things that's important there, and I'm glad you brought that up, is the price point. I'm not going to do that for somebody if I'm selling a $50 product, if I'm doing a $100 product, right? Because it's based on time. What I teach people is, what I help people do is that you're going to be able to get a sale. My job as a sales consultant or sales coach, if you want to call it, is to shorten the process between the sales. You might get one Monday, you might get one Friday. My job is to shorten it, that you get one on Monday, you get one on Thursday, then one on Wednesday, then one on Tuesday, then you get two in one day, right? Because it's a numbers game. So when you actually look at the price point, if you're talking brokerage or you're talking boats or cars, the price point, anything over $500, say $1,000, yeah, it's better to be with somebody, and then you have all other things that you can adapt or grow in, say body language or visuals, so you can read people, seeing how they're receptive to you. When you do the face-to-face, you have more tools that you can learn to realize what you're doing wrong in the sale rather than on the phone. But if your price point is low, then most of the time I'm just going to do the numbers game and then just prove my voice, my dialect, how I say things, how much pause I have on the phone. That's where coaching comes in. And I teach people that this is a skill. It's not something that you just do. It's a skill that you learn, just like welding. And it takes practice. And the only time you get it, you read a book or you can watch a DVD, but it only starts actually working is when you practice it. That's why we do role play. I be the customer and you try to sell me, and we go back and forth and I tell you how to do it. That's how you learn. It's like football players. All week they practice for a 1 hour game, even though they've been doing it for years, because it's a skill, right? So that's why I say coaches. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
No, finish this up, please.
So when I tell people, I said the football players are millionaires. They've been playing since 8 years old. They go in the field, they make all this money, but when they come to the sideline, who's the first person they talk to? A coach. And the coach is telling them what they did wrong, even though they've been playing for 20 years or so. So the same thing in sales, it's an action item. So, if you have somebody there calibrating what you're doing, so I have people that send me their calls, with technology now, it's easy. You record the calls with authorization, of course, and they put it in a Dropbox, and I can listen to it, and I can go back and say, why the hell did you say that? Where are you going? They were like, well, I just thought. And I said, the first thing I teach you is you never assume anything. It's all rule out by questions, right? Yeah. Okay, so we got a problem here. So let's go back through and drill it, and then get back on the phone. And so it's corrections as you improve your technique and your skills.
Right. We seem to be getting every once in a while an organization that couldn't afford to do bricks and mortar to start with, now that they've been somewhat successful on the internet, are seriously thinking about opening a bricks and mortar store because they get direct impact with the customer in the buying process. So the impersonal nature of the internet, some companies are beginning to see that having a bricks and mortar physical point of contact may help them grow their company.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Are you familiar with any companies that are doing that?
Yes. They realize these are trends. The internet's going to constantly be here. I mean, Amazon is eating up retail like nobody's business. It's making it easier for people to buy. But there's always there's always three kinds of buyers, right? So those are people that will point and click and want that. There's people that will just, get on chat. And then there's people that want to talk to somebody. How many times you call a company and look for a number and you're like, dang it, I can't get nobody on the phone. I just got to ask this one question. I want to talk to somebody. I can click and buy it, but I want to actually talk to somebody. I want to chat. So one of the things I covered about a year ago, I have a limousine company here in Tampa Bay that I run, and so I put chat on there. I put a chat on my limousine on my website, and you'll be amazed the percentage. Because somebody said you don't have chat on there, put chat on there. And I was like, okay, I'll just put it on there because it was free, and you'll be amazed how many chats I get per week because I've given them all the information. They just want to talk, and they might have an extra question, and they appreciate actually communicating with people And so you have people that want to chat, and you have people that want to call. And so if you're not giving them an opportunity to communicate with humans, that helps you in your competition, right? And so people start to realize that, all this Instagram and instant messaging, get back to the human nature of it, and you'll realize that it's going to help you not only sell better, but you can ask the person, why did you buy from me? And if they tell you why they bought from you, that's automatically your marketing, that you can rebrand your marketing based upon the feedback that you get from them telling you why they bought from you in person, right? So it's so many different advantages to actually communicating live.
Well, back to Don.
Ben, with your website one more time.
It's 360salesconsulting.com, so 360 sales, S-A-L-E-S, consulting.com, and you can go in there and get the book, and there's a download for a free guide. And my book is Master the Art of Closing the Sale on Amazon by Benjamin Brown, and it's the game-changing 10-step sales process for getting more clients and also referrals.
We've been talking with Ben Brown about the pitfalls small business leaders need to avoid and to how to really goose up your sales effort. It's been fascinating. A link to his website will be on tonight at recalculating.biz, where you can hear this and every other program, past and future, as well as tell us through a survey who you'd like to hear on this program. Ben Brown, thank you so much for joining us.
Dan Perkins here from recalculating.biz. I want to tell you about Bob Bethel. Bob's new book is Strengthen Your Business, Fail-Proof Strategies for Small Business. His suggestions are easy to understand and very helpful. Bob Bethel's book, Strengthen Your Business, can be found at Amazon.com or can be ordered at your local bookstore. Dan Perkins with your featured book.
Dan, as a financial advisor all these years, I think you're going to be fascinated by our next guest. Mike Foy is with J.D. Power, and he's here to talk about their just-released study on financial advisors. Mike, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me.
Well, when I read the release about it, I was absolutely fascinated, but I'm going to leave a lot of it to Dan because he knows an awful lot. But I'm going to hone in on one part alone. There's some interesting information you raised about female financial advisors. It's fascinating because in all of my talking with them and interaction over the years, I could name on my hand the number of women financial advisors. But Mike, tell us what you found about in your survey about them. Then I'll turn it over to Dan.
Sure. Yeah, it was really interesting because we see a lot in the media about the percentage of investable assets that women now control, right? So because of, I think, things like greater longevity, and, new businesses, women-owned businesses being started, something like 50% or so of wealth now is managed by women. But yet, to your point, women are very much underrepresented in among financial advisors. So something like 15-16% of advisors are women. And that's something that many firms are trying to change, particularly given the number of advisors that are retiring in the coming years, right? So data suggests that something like 43% of current active advisors are over 55 years old, right? So many of these folks are going to be leaving the industry. They're going to need to be replaced, and a big part of replacing them is going to be tapping into bringing more women into this industry. So in our study, we did we looked at how satisfied existing women are with their broker-dealers. And we did find that in general, the good news is that women who are in the industry are actually very satisfied in general. They're more satisfied than men. They have more loyalty to their firm. But there were also a few areas that we found where they have some pain points that firms that want to be successful with women really should be focused on improving.
What are they?
And so, specifically, one thing, and this certainly goes beyond just, the wealth management business, but the whole issue of work-life balance, right? So trying to ensure that both policies and technology allow people to be as flexible as possible in terms of managing their, career commitments with other commitments in their life. Women advisors were much less likely than men to say that they had a good work-life balance. They also were less satisfied with their compensation. And they also felt that mentorship programs, which are so important to bringing new successful advisors into the industry, they were much more likely to say, or less likely to say, that those were effective than their male counterparts. So those were a few opportunities we really saw that firms can look to improve themselves in order to make themselves a more attractive employer for potential women advisors.
Well, I have a lot more questions, but I'm going to turn it over to Dan now.
Thank you for joining us today. As Don said, I've been managing money for 45 years, the last 35 years in private practice with my own little boutique firm. When I first started in the business as a broker for Merrill Lynch in the Columbus, Ohio office, I saw a lot of survey work that was done by Merrill Lynch at the time. And in looking at women as investors, the number one concern that women had at that time was they were afraid of outliving their money. And here I am 45 years later and talking to clients existing and new, and the same issue is still there, that they're concerned about outliving their money. The other issue is, and this is where I understand where you're coming from, but perhaps my practice, both working on Wall Street and in a private practice, may add somewhat of a different perspective. I think one of the reasons, and I noticed when I was in production and we had some women brokers in the office, that their tolerance for risk is much lower than male brokers. And what happens is that when you talk to a woman who, especially a widow, who is now faced with a daunting task if their husband has left them with a pile of money, they feel, one, inadequate, and they still are concerned that they're going to outlive their money, and are very risk averse. I think it is somewhat the nature of women to be more risk averse than men. So your survey didn't address the psychological challenges of women as investment advisors, or did it?
It's interesting because we do, in addition to surveying advisors, we do also survey retail investors. And what we find in our retail investor study is consistent with what you just talked about from your own experience, namely that women are much less likely to identify themselves as aggressive or, having a high tolerance for risk than men. They're also much less likely to be confident in their understanding or their sort of financial knowledge or competence, right? So, and there's a lot of third-party material as well on the sort of the confidence gap, right? That women don't, even if they actually do have equivalent levels of knowledge to men, they don't think they do, right? They lack the confidence. And so I think you're right, and I think that to some degree, women advisors, and again, we don't necessarily see a lot of support for the fact that the only way to deliver a great experience to female investors is to have female advisors, right? I mean, that's that's too simplistic. But I think women advisors may be a little bit more sensitive to some of the issues that you just described, and therefore may be able to connect more with a woman's more risk-averse psychology and just be more sensitive to some of the concerns that women may bring to the table that are a little bit different. And so that's, I think, a part of the puzzle as well, the sort of the behavioral finance piece of it. So we definitely do see a lot of what you're talking about, certainly on the investor side in our research.
Yeah, the other thing is, just so our audience understands and doesn't misconstrue anything you or I are saying, in order to be a broker at a New York Stock Exchange listed firm, you have to have a passing score on the NYSE Stock Exchange exam. You have to be registered and pass your state licensing. So there is no favoritism of women versus men in the testing of your fundamental and investments because you're a woman. Everybody has to pass the same exams, and they all have to have the same passing score, so that the regulatory oversight system who tests the basic competence of males or females, it doesn't see whether it's a male taking the test or a female taking a test. It looks at how a person has answered the questions and have they answered them properly. So I don't think there's a bias within the industry from the testing and licensing, males versus females. It is what you do with that information. And again, speaking from my experience of working with Merrill, you have to spend a certain amount of time preparing for the exam. Once you pass the exam, then the rest of the time is spent in a training program of how you understand to take all of this technical and fundamental knowledge and apply it against customer needs. So again, there is no discrimination male versus female in the training programs or the testing programs, but maybe it is just the difference between males and females when it comes to execution.
Yeah, and from a knowledge and confidence standpoint, my comments were really more on the investor side, actually, in terms of just level of what they believe to be their knowledge of investments and their financial situation.
So the other thing that I wanted to ask you about your research is you talked, and I think I heard it right, 43% of the brokers are going to retire within some period of time?
Well, yeah, 43,
right?
And this is from a company called Cerulli that's really considered an authority on the advisor market and the number of advisors in different channels of the business and so on. And their data suggests that 43% of active financial advisors today are over 55 years old. So, within presumably 10 years or so of leaving the business. So clearly, a large number of advisors are going to be leaving the business over the next 10 years. And while, things like improved technology can help individual advisors obviously be more productive than they were, a decade or so ago, many of those advisors are going to have to be replaced, right? And so, from our perspective, looking at groups that are underrepresented today, like women, like millennials, those are things that we focused on in trying to help firms to better understand the drivers of satisfaction and success for financial advisors that come from some of those groups that, again, haven't really been traditionally as well represented in the advisor force.
So I just want to make, again, a point of clarity for our audience. There are lots of different professions within the investment community, and I want to make sure that I understand and our audience understands the basis of this survey. Was it, like myself, registered investment advisors, or was it stockbrokers?
So the survey is of registered representatives.
So those are stockbrokers.
These are what used to be called stockbrokers, yes, that are either in the captive or employee channel, like you mentioned Merrill Lynch earlier, so the wirehouses and other firms like that, or on the independent broker dealer side with firms like LPL being the biggest player, obviously in that space. Or Cetera or Commonwealth, those kinds of firms. So we are talking about registered reps as opposed to RIAs.
Right, and I think that's a very important distinction because, again, a lot of consumers don't understand, even from a regulatory standpoint, there are two different sets of licensing and review. I, as a registered investment advisor, am subject to FINRA and also my state registration. The broker would be subject to the Justice State Reservation because they earn a commission. But it's important. But I would say to you that my group, the Registered Investment Advisor Group, will be 73 in about 2 weeks. And I love what I do, and I've been independent for almost 26 years. I see more and more people leaving, quote, Wall Street and starting their own boutiques in their late 50s, early 60s because it's something they like to do, and they're tired of the bureaucracy of the big Wall Street firms and everything else and want to be able to help people on an independent basis. So you've not done any studies on my group, investment advisors, per se?
Well, we have not. We don't, because we're really surveying for advisors in terms of how satisfied they are they with their employer? And so our business model is we sell our research to the firms. So we don't survey RIAs specifically, although we do ask questions that are aimed at trying to understand trends like the one you talked about in terms of how many of these folks in our survey are at least considering starting their own RIA or joining an RIA, but basically looking to go independent for many of the reasons that you talked about, that they, particularly over the last 10 years with the bank acquisition of many of these brokerages, that has, I think, in the perception of many advisors, increased the level of bureaucracy, constrained the way that they manage their practice. And so, we do see that, not a majority certainly, but a significant minority are at least considering leaving their firm potentially to go independent.
So is this the first time that you've done this study, or have you done it in previous years?
No, we've been doing it. It's an annual study. We've been doing it for just about a decade now, actually.
What are you seeing? Are there any surprises in this current study over what you've been seeing over the last 9 years? Is there anything new that come to the surface that you didn't expect to see, or just kind of jumped out at you as a new trend or a concern?
Well, I don't know that there was one thing that was brand new this year, but we have been seeing. I think we've been asking some questions in recent years related to things like robo-advisor, related to the Department of Labor fiduciary rule, things that are really have come into the at least the industry radar that have the potential to transform the industry. So we've been looking at trying to gauge advisors' perceptions and perspectives on some of those issues. But I wouldn't say that there was a particular shocker this year in terms of the results.
I'll ask you one more question, and I'll turn it over to Don. Has the number of participants in the industry changed?
So obviously, the industry as we're defining it for this study has actually shrunk a little bit over the past few years in terms of the number of registered reps affiliated with these firms. But the number of participants in our study has actually gone up a bit. We've done some new things to try to get more sample, which always makes our findings more compelling. So we
Right.
have about 3,300 financial advisors this year that completed our study. It's a challenging study to get sample because these are obviously busy people, and our survey
Right.
tends to be fairly long because we do ask questions on a wide range of aspects of the experience. So we ask questions about leadership and culture, compensation, technology support, kind of the back office operational type support. So really we ask a lot because we really want to be able to help firms identify what are the critical things that they should be doing better in order to keep their advisors loyal.
Good. Don, back to you.
Mike, my first question is, J.D. Power is always associated with quality. Do you do any quality measurements in any way in the survey?
Well, so I think, right, J.D. Power is best known for the quality surveys we do in automotive, in the automotive industry, where we got our start 50 years ago. But we do really, I think, what our surveys are about, whether it's in financial services or automotive or any of the other dozen or so industries that we operate in, it's really about client satisfaction and the client experience. So whether it's a tangible product like automotive or whether it's a service like wealth management, we're really, trying to understand the drivers of client satisfaction and loyalty. So in this case, we're actually, measuring advisors as opposed to consumers, and we're looking at, the services they get with their broker-dealer. But I think the principle is the same for what we're trying to measure as J.D. Power. So we're really looking at, in a sense, the quality of the platform that these broker-dealers provide to their financial advisors. So I think that's the sort of the common theme throughout J.D. Power, whether we're talking about, cars or insurance or, airlines.
I don't know whether it's your survey or another one. I thought it was Robert James and one other were considered the two best providers of the services. Is that you, or is that another survey?
Yeah, so in the employee channel, Edward Jones and Raymond James were the top two finishers as firms. And on the independent broker-dealer side, Commonwealth and Raymond James were the top two. So Raymond James kind of plays in both spaces. So that was our study, yes.
Well, I guess the other point, a broker makes money several different ways, but like Schwab allows you to trade relatively cheaply, and they give you the advice relatively cheaply, whereas the brokers, how do they make their money, and what is the trend in how brokers make their money? They used to make it as a percentage of the portfolio. Is that still the case, or is it changing? What is the trend in that?
Yeah, so what we see is, that at one time, obviously, it was basically, trading commissions was driving revenue, and that has been shifting and continues to shift towards a more fee-based approach where investors pay a percentage of the assets that are managed. That's still a shift that we see happening. The Department of Labor fiduciary rule, which may or may not be dead finally, but that is something that I think had started to accelerate that transition. But it's still somewhat of a mix, between commission and fees that are based on assets under management. So obviously there's other fee models, but those at least in the space that we're surveying are still the primary ways that the advisors are compensated.
Well, what do you think is going to happen over the next 2 years? Did you try to find any future trends from your survey?
Yeah, so I mean, we did ask, advisors how likely they are, for instance, to be still at their firm in the next 1 to 2 years, and we found that actually a fairly significant number of them had some belief that they might be leaving their firm. So particularly if we look at the wirehouses, right? So the Merrill Lynch's, Morgan Stanley, UBS, and Wells Fargo. Almost 20% of those folks said that they either definitely or probably would leave their firm over the next 1 to 2 years. So I think there's a challenge that those firms have in ensuring that they're retaining some of the people that you guys were just talking about as being at a kind of a stage of their career where independence is an appealing option. And what are those firms going to do from a succession planning standpoint that's going to make it less appealing for their top producing advisors to consider alternatives. So I think that's something that lots of these firms are faced with in terms of keeping talent. And then the other piece is how do you bring new advisors into the industry? Typically, they've done it in one of two ways. So one is writing big checks to recruit established competitive advisors, and the other is trying to bring new people into the industry, which is expensive in its own way. It takes 5 years typically to get somebody through all of the training and professional development, and most of them at the end of that don't wind up becoming successful FAs. So I think getting better at how to bring people into the business and do so in a way that's going to maximize their potential for success. Those are, a couple of the challenges I think that we see firms facing, moving forward.
Dan, you get to ask the last question.
Thank you. So, following up what you were talking with Don, what is the perception about the reputation of stockbrokers?
It's interesting. So when we look at, going back to our investor study, right, if we're talking about how consumers or investors view advisors, what we find is actually, although, obviously over the last 10 years, there's been a lot of negative media related to the industry as a whole. What we find is that people, investors tend to have a high level of trust in their own advisor, right? So, it's a little bit, I think, like the way people think about Congress, right? So, the image that people have of Congress is really low, but they view their own representative as kind of the exception to the rule. I think that there's an analogy there for financial advice, that people maybe have some distrust for the industry as a whole, but they score the trust in their own advisor very highly.
Thank you.
Well, we could go on and on. Unfortunately, Mike, we've run out of time. We've been talking with J.D. Power's Mike Foy. A link to his website will be on recalculating.biz tonight, where you can hear this show and every past and future Recalculating show. You can also tell us what guests you'd like to see on this program. Mike, before we go, can you tell people the website and how they can find more about the survey?
Sure, absolutely. They can just go to jdpower.com and find the results of the research, as well as all of the customer satisfaction research that we do across all the industries we work with.
Thank you so much for being with us, Mike. It's been very illuminating.
Recalculating, a program designed to help you be successful.